Saddest Night Out, episode 481, Friday the 1st of March. Link in bio to find me online. Here are some things I've been into since we last spoke. I recently listened to The Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler, and it's already one of my favorite books I've ever read. Well, I listened to the audiobook. It was published in 1993. It's essentially a science fiction book about a dystopian future. It's written in 1993, and reading it, listening to it in particular, is a massive trip because it's set in the future, and it's essentially a series of diary entries written by the protagonist, and I'm pretty sure one of those diary entries is literally today's date, Saturday, 1st of March, 2025. It is what this period of time looked like in the imagination of someone in the early 90s. And it is wild to see what makes sense, what is maybe a bit early, what's already happened. Yeah, highly recommend reading that book. In fact, I probably more recommend listening to it because essentially listening to a bunch of diary entries from someone is not a million miles away from what this podcast is, basically. But touch wood, cross fingers, and all the other good luck things, what I describe does not ever become what's described in The Parable of the Sower. But I highly recommend checking that book out. I'm currently listening to A Promised Land by former American President Barack Obama. And that's another massive trip to listen to. To listen to him describe his presidency as we live in the shadow of the current presidency, it is wild to think of the comparisons between the two. And yet, the Barack Obama book was written during COVID, I think. So I think it goes all the way up to that. I haven't even gotten to the introduction of Trump yet. The whole book is about 29 hours long, and I think I have maybe 6 hours left. So I don't know how much time will be spent. I'm not even on Obama's second term, let alone the president that follows him, etc. There are hints at it, and yeah, again, another massive trip. And I'm also really into the podcast One Song with Diallo Riddle and Luxury, spelled with two X's, the guy on TikTok who often whispers the word interpolation. I think he might need to let go of saying that in his introduction every time. I particularly enjoy the episodes of this podcast which are focused around indie sleaze, Bloghouse, the music of the 2000s, etc. I would go for the episodes that focus on Maps by the Yeah Yeahs, Walking on a Dream by Empire of the Sun, the two episodes about Daft Punk, Mr. Brightside by The Killers, and one of their most recent ones, which was 1901 by Phoenix. These guys clearly lived it in the 2000s to varying degrees. Like, I would not be surprised if they are either in the book Never Be Alone Again by Lena Abascal, or at least were at one of the events that were described in that book. In fact, I think Luxury was at that Daft Punk show at Coachella in, I think, 2007 when they debuted the whole Light Pyramid, etc. And EDM essentially was born. So those are just a few things that I've been into recently since I last spoke to you. It's always a bit of a struggle to make an episode when it's been a while since I've made an episode. I overthink, maybe I should do it on this, know about this. And ultimately, in fact, what I originally wrote the notes for this episode, I kind of wanted to scrap, and then I thought, no, you know what, why not share it anyway? Because there's no hard and fast rule of what can and cannot be in an episode, as long as there is an episode and some kind of communication. And I figured it's better than going another day, week, month of radio silence. So I thought I'd just start with some things I've been into, just to kind of wet the whistle, get the ball rolling a bit. But essentially, what I was going to double down on was the title of this episode, which is something I tweeted a while back. A thought that's been on my mind for a little bit now. Half jokingly, half seriously. And what's about to follow is a little bit of a somewhat aimless ramble, maybe. It could be accused of being that. But it's an unfinished thought, essentially. So there's no concise observation. It's more just trying to tie things together, maybe reaching a bit. Maybe you can help fill in the blanks of where I'm going if you get where I'm going with all of this. I'm hyping it up too much. Let me just read off the notes that I made. That I was going to abandon, but I thought, why not? Also, all the stuff I'm about to talk to, because of this enormous Google Doc that I have, I can see that I touched on a lot of this stuff back on episode 418. I forget what date that episode was. I think it was... Wow. 2000... Oh, it was last year, 2024. It was 13th of May, 2024. A lot of the stuff I'm talking about now, I brought up in that episode and probably did a better job of it then as well. But anyway, here's where my head is somewhat at. Up to now, culture has just gone along with the latest development. And I'll just, once again, this is not research-based. This is not stats and figures. This is vibes. This is just conjecture. This is just trying to read the temperature and the weather, so to speak. But citation heavily needed throughout, and I welcome anyone who has thoughts in the opposite direction. So, up to now it feels as though culture has just gone along with the latest development, whether it's the wheel, the engine, the printing press, the factory, the train, the car, aeroplanes, radio, TV, internet, smartphones, etc. It was as default as gravity. This is the new thing. It starts off expensive and only for early adopters, but eventually everyone gets on board and it goes from being a novelty to part of the furniture. Remember how big the hubbub was around the first iPhone, and now think about how easy it is to get annoyed if your iPhone is loading a little bit slowly. When once upon a time we're like, oh my goodness, a touch screen phone that has the internet and a camera. This is crazy. That's what I mean. But now it feels like there's a turning point in that attitude for a few reasons. And this is the part that isn't so fleshed out, really leaning into just conjecture and guesswork here. All vibes. I think part of the reason it feels like there's some kind of turning point happening is, one, it's easier than ever to broadcast to the world from wherever you are and to look at the archives, to look at the past. In particular, I'm thinking about how in the 90s, if you wanted to listen to the debut album by the Velvet Underground, you had to, first of all, how would you even find out about that album? Maybe you have an older sibling, someone in school, maybe you came across a TV show that told you about it. There was no Wikipedia. There was no YouTube. You'd then have to go to a record store and ask if they have it, and they'd likely have to import it, which means you'd have to wait a few weeks, or it would be out of print and thus unavailable. There was no eBay. Maybe you'd have to go to car boot sales or Sunday markets to find someone selling a copy of it. Of course, all of that sounds pretty much whimsical now, because you can go from listening to me talking to you to listening to the debut album by the Velvet Underground in 4-5 taps of your screen? Not including having to type out Velvet Underground into your phone. And also, I am now essentially talking to the entire world for all posterity, for free, relatively speaking, from my room. This would be impossible to do in the 90s. And that's part of the reason why I feel like there's a turning point. So one, it's easier than ever to broadcast to the world from wherever you are and to look at the archives, look at the past. 2, AI is on the horizon. 3, wage inequality and the struggle for upward mobility. If the next quote-unquote new thing after radio, TV, internet, smartphones, if the next thing is some kind of VR headset, I don't think they'll become as ubiquitous as smartphones because they just cost too much. I think that would be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And 4, diminishing returns. Streaming services have gone from what feels like a new evolution to essentially a repeat of an older idea, but just more expensive. So Netflix went from, oh, wow, you can actually just watch relatively speaking, any TV show, watch the whole series in one thing. It kind of invented binge watching. But now it feels a lot like just cable TV with extra steps, a more expensive cable TV, if you will. If you get Netflix and Disney Plus and Amazon Prime and Now TV and I don't know what else is there, YouTube Premium, etc. Does that not all eventually add up to costing more than just a cable TV package? Similarly, the difference between the iPhone 4 and the iPhone 5 and the iPhone 15 and the iPhone 16. In fact, today I learned we're up to the iPhone 16 now. I think that's the next one coming out. I couldn't tell you what new features there are. I think it maybe is, I don't know, slimmer, lighter, slightly better camera. And see, the novelty of social media and music streaming has worn off. There won't be a new Facebook or Amazon because they'll just get bought out by Facebook or Amazon. TikTok feels like an aberration. It feels lucky that that managed to sneak through. And even then, it managed to do that by the skin of its teeth because it was banned for what, 48 hours? Or was it like 20 minutes? It was banned and came right back. But it took a while to be on the Apple App Store again. Whatever new innovation there is to follow in those footsteps, I can't remember where I saw it, so take it with a pinch of salt, but it was something like either an already existing giant will buy the new thing out before it gets a chance to become something, or some kind of angel investor will ask to invest in the new thing early on and say, I just want a seat on your board. Nothing too crazy, just a seat on your board. Little by little, they will get to the point where they own the majority stake of the company. And then even if the founders don't want to sell or whatever, this once smaller angel investor now essentially has the deciding vote and they decide to sell. So it's like the idea of banks being too big to fail, but with like online innovations, so to speak. Did I mention all of this is just a pointless ramble? But we plow forward anyway. So the next development is something like cherry picking what we want from the past. We already see this to some degree with pop music. That's the latest thing I'm seeing online now. This current trend of saying that X artist is reheating Y artist's nachos. I think there's some kind of... By the way, I've been very ill recently, so apologies if I keep sniffing or if my nose keeps getting blocked mid-sentence like this. It's very annoying. We're 11 minutes in. It's too late to turn back now. I often hear in podcasts, if you stayed this long, thank you for listening. Are people out there listening to podcasts to the halfway point and thinking, I can't be bothered, let me listen to something else? Because once I've started, I'm in till the end. No matter where it ends up going. If I've started, I need to see it through. It's like paying for a ticket to see a movie and then walking out after an hour or so. Even if it's incredibly boring, I've paid for this ticket. I'm going on the ride. Where was I? So with pop music, the idea of one artist reheating another artist's nachos. The best example I saw was Dionne Warwick on Twitter. Someone said, how do you feel about artists reheating nachos? And she, understandably, was like, what are you talking about? And someone said, Cilla Black tried to reheat your nachos, but was very unsuccessful. And she said, thank you, I understand this now. So in terms that might be more understandable here, Tate McRae has been, I guess, accused of reheating Britney Spears' nachos. Lady Gaga is reheating classic Lady Gaga, and classic Lady Gaga was reheating Madonna, etc. It's like a long-winded, somewhat humorous way of saying this person is kind of imitating what another person has already done, but in their own way. Except now, as I mentioned earlier, we have easier access than ever to history in the archives. It's a lot more difficult to escape the shadow of the influence from what came before. People will talk about Britney Spears as if she's still currently making music now, because access to her music is as easy as access to whatever the new thing is. In fact, whereas in the past, the new thing had an inherent head start, an inherent, not objective, alternative advantage. The new thing had an inherent advantage because you'd have to go to a physical music store and their physical shelf space was limited, and they would likely fill that shelf space with the new music that's out. So if you wanted to hear a particular old album, they might have the greatest hits of that artist, but they'd have to order in a particular older album. Like I was saying about Velvet Underground. They might maybe have, say, the greatest hits of Lou Reed, but to actually hear the album with the banana on the cover, they'd have to order it in, you'd have to wait, see if it's available, etc. Whereas now, as hard as your Tate McRae's or the Kid Leroy, I'm trying to think of other new artists that immediately come to mind, and the fact I'm struggling is a reflection of all of this. A newer artist now, it's that much harder for them to make their own mark because it's so easy to say, oh, that reminds me of this and this and this. Because it used to be the older generations that would think that, but the younger generations would just love the new thing. But the younger generations, I think, can be just as jaded as older generations were because they have as much access to the old stuff and can just say, oh, this just sounds like Led Zeppelin, like Måneskin. If Måneskin were in the 90s, there might have been a bit more steam behind them. But now, not Måneskin, sorry, Greta Van Fleet. immediately people are like, oh, this is just diet, Led Zeppelin, etc. So it's that much harder for you to kind of forge your own path because it's so easy to compare what you're doing to people that have done it before and who have arguably coined or made it their signature thing. I'm getting distracted from what was already a meandering ramble, but let me try and find where I was going with this. So we're talking about cherry picking what we want from the past. That's it in music. We already know that this is happening a lot in TV and cinema with reboots and sequels and adaptations. Nostalgia is the safest investment because of the supposed built-in audience. Do you invest in writing a new young adult magical fantasy series, which may or may not succeed, or do you make a new adaptation of Harry Potter? Similarly, do you invest in a new big action series, or just make another Jurassic Park? This type of rehashing is in a spiral of diminishing returns, which has me wondering what's next. And I think there'll be an honest reappraisal of what actually brings us together. I thought it would lead to a rejection of social media, of following the hot new thing for the sake of it, but I'm not so sure. I think that type of behavior is a little bit hardwired now. I don't know if you can unring that bell. If anything, that energy seems to be aimed at Substacks and Discords, essentially gated online communities. Whatever Tumblr was, I think the spirit of it exists in communities where you have to pay £5 a month to join if you're listening to the right podcast or have found the right newsletter, etc. I'm not too bullish on that because there's only so many £5 a month things that people can afford. See the aforementioned Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus, blah, blah, etc., etc. At the end of the day, each month you'll find yourself just hemorrhaging money because you're signed up to all these different little things. And I think as people are more squeezed than ever, that doesn't feel like something that can last. I'm already frustrated with the things like the New York Times. I was really into their podcast, the New York Times Popcast. I've mentioned it a few times on here. But now it's behind a paywall. You can only listen to the most recent 2 episodes. If you want to listen to the archive, you've got to finally sign up to New York Times, which is something I've already resisted doing, even though I used to do the daily Wordle. Getting sidetracked again. Also, the people that can afford to join every Patreon, Substack, etc. aren't necessarily the ones making culture happen. And this is just basically the cycle of gentrification, where there's a place that's relatively cheap to live, artists, etc. move there, make the place appealing, then prices go up, artists can't afford to live there anymore, the people that can afford to live there don't like all the noise, and then whatever was cool about the place becomes just a memory. Look up CBGBs online and see what it is now. And in that light, I'm honestly surprised the 100 Club in London is still there. But yeah, this is where I'm definitely just rambling because I haven't got a conclusion yet. If you see where I'm going with this and have suggestions, link in bio where to find me online, or leave a comment on Spotify or YouTube. But essentially, what I think I'm getting at is I see us turning back to the basics that actually provide something, instead of just the things that are sold as doing that. The podcast boom, where every celebrity has started an interview series, I can see that drying up. Whatever the next gaming console or generation of smartphone is, I don't think there'll be a rush at midnight to get whatever the new thing is. The online duplicate of getting together, I think we'll find ourselves hungry for the real thing. And I think the nostalgia fest of the Oasis reunion will ultimately be like eating fast food, where it's really enjoyable in the moment, but leaves you hungry as soon as you're done. Hungry to the point where it's almost like you forgot you just ate a meal. You're ready to eat something else. But as I said earlier, this is episode 481, and I think I covered all of this more effectively on episode 418. That's a nice bit of symmetry there. But yeah, I think we need to rediscover fire. In fact, me starting this episode by just talking about the things I'm into, that's my attempt of walking in that direction. I think these days, there's less of a return on investment on making something and more of a return on investment on critiquing and commentating on what's happening. I see a lot of people, I still get the odd video of, here's my new song, we're a new band, I'm a new artist, do you like this kind of music, you might like me, etc. And I don't see many of those that get much attention. Often when that type of video comes across my For You page, it's in the double digits of likes or something. But I see a lot more videos of people in front of a green screen commentating on what people are doing, and those seem to be a lot more popular. But I think we need to find a way to redirect that energy towards actually making something. James Murphy of LCD Soundsystem, if TikTok was around in the early 2000s, he definitely could have easily become a jaded elder hipster on... He could have been Anthony Fantana before there was Anthony Fantana, but instead, he said, let me make that argument by making music. And I, for one, am quite glad that he did. In fact, I think LCD Soundsystem are doing a bunch of dates in Brixton Academy in June, I think. I don't know if I'll be there for any of them, but I hope there'll be a good time to whoever does go. But that's what I mean. That energy used to go towards, I have all these ideas, let me make something. Whereas now it's like, I have all these ideas, let me talk about them and critique whoever is trying to make something. Which is why I think it's that much harder for anyone to break through now, as well as having to compete with all the greatest songs in the world being a lot easier to reach than they used to be. We need to rediscover fire. And I'll do my little attempt by keeping this going again. Yeah, I'll stop there. 21 minutes, that's long enough. Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for listening. Link in bio to find me online. I'll catch you in the next one. Till then, take care.